The hospital director fired her like she was disposable. Moments later, a Navy helicopter landed on the hospital roof. And the question isn't why they came, it's who they came for. Picture this: fluorescent lights, humming rain, streaking the glass, a waiting room packed with coughs and crying kids. A luxury hospital upstairs, a war zone downstairs. Rachel Carter stands in wet scrubs, holding the line between a dying John Doe and a donor's screaming son. One signature could protect her career. One refusal could save a life. She chooses the patient. The system punishes her. If you've ever been told to stay quiet, to play nice, to let power win, this story will hit hard. Stay to the end, and you'll see what integrity costs and what it can unleash. Tell me where you're watching from. Hit like if you believe every life counts. The rotors, the shouting, the name that did not belong to a civilian nurse. None of that made sense until you understood the place she worked in and the kind of pressure that never showed up on a patient chart. Bayview Meridian Medical Center sat near the water in Norfolk, all clean glass and polished stone, a landmark you could spot from the highway. From the street, it looked like a luxury hotel that happened to have ambulances. Valets in pressed jackets opened car doors for people who wore watches that cost more than a nurse's annual salary. Inside the lobby, the air was cool and scented, and the floor was so glossy it reflected your face back at you like a question. Upstairs, the hospital sold quiet. Private suites with ocean views, gourmet menus, a concierge desk that could find you a specialist faster than it could find you a wheelchair. Downstairs, the emergency department did not sell anything but time. Time was measured in oxygen saturation and blood pressure in the thin distance between a normal heartbeat and a flat line. The automatic doors to the ER never stopped moving. A man with a cut over his eyebrow stumbled in, holding a towel to his face that was already turning red. A mother carried a toddler whose skin looked too hot to touch. Someone was yelling in Spanish at the registration desk, panic making every word sharper. Somewhere, behind the triage area, a patient coughed so hard it sounded like tearing cloth. The air carried the smell of disinfectant and sweat, the metallic edge of blood, the sour tang of vomit that never fully left the walls. The lights were too bright and never changed even when it was 3 a.m, and your body begged for darkness. Rachel Carter moved through it like she belonged to it. Not because she enjoyed it, but because she understood it. She was 33, a little taller than most of the nurses' shoulders set, in a way that made her look built for holding doors open against a storm. Her hair was always pulled tight, not for style, but so no one could grab it, and so it would never fall into a sterile field. Her scrubs never looked wrinkled. Her badge was clipped the same way every shift, as if a small ritual could keep the rest of the world from shifting too far. New residents did not know what to make of her at first. They mistook her quiet for softness. They mistook her calm for indifference. They learned fast. When a trauma came in, Rachel did not ask for space. She created it. People felt it in the way she spoke, in the way she called out numbers and times and orders like she was reading from a script only she could see. Pressures dropping. 2 large bore IVs. Get me a warmer. Labs on the run. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her tone made people move. That night, she had been on since sundown. It was past midnight then, past 2, then past 4. She had stopped noticing the clock because the clock did not matter. Only the monitors mattered. Only the breaths mattered. By the time the eastern windows began to lighten, the ER looked like the aftermath of a fight. Used gauze piled in red-lined bins. A stretcher pushed against a wall because there was nowhere else to put it. An empty wheelchair with 1 broken footrest. A thin smear of blood on the floor that someone had tried to mop and failed. Dr. Jonah Pierce came out of Trauma 2, wiping his forehead with the back of his gloved hand. He was a good doctor, which in an ER meant he was a little tired all the time and carried it like a weight he refused to set down. He had been an attending long enough to have seen every kind of disaster, but not long enough to stop feeling it. He looked at Rachel and paused. "You've been here 16 hours, he said. Rachel was stripping off gloves, turning them inside out as she pulled. Her hands did not tremble. Her eyes looked dry. "Trauma 2 is stable," she said. I updated the family. Pierce glanced toward the nurse's station where 2 fresh residents stood with coffee cups, eyes too wide. "You need to go home," he said quieter. "You look like you are running on fumes." Rachel reached for a clipboard. "I have one more check." Pierce already knew the answer. Bay 4. She nodded once. Pierce exhaled. "Administration is pushing bed turnover. They want the county transfer paperwork on every uninsured patient before breakfast." Rachel did not stop walking. "He is not stable enough." Pierce followed her a few steps, lowering his voice like the walls had ears. "Rachel, if Malcolm Voss comes down here and sees a John Doe in a trauma bay during the morning rush, he is going to make it your problem." Rachel's mouth twitched, not a smile. "It usually is." Bay 4 was separated by a curtain that did not fully close and did not block sound. You could hear the monitor through it, a slow, steady rhythm. You could hear the oxygen flow, a soft hiss like an animal breathing in sleep. The patient lay under a thin blanket. Older, smaller than the bed, made him look. His face was weathered, the kind of weathering that came from years outside sun and wind and cold. His skin was pale, but flushed with fever. A nasal cannula sat beneath his nostrils. His breathing was wet and uneven, each inhale a struggle. The chart said John Doe. Found under a bridge. Hypothermic. Severe pneumonia. Malnourished. No identification. The triage nurse had rolled her eyes when he came in. "Another homeless guy," she had muttered. "Another one who will take up a bed all night and leave before the bill prints." Rachel had not corrected her out loud. She had simply stepped closer to the stretcher and looked at the man's hands. Even in unconsciousness, his right hand kept drifting toward his neck, fingers brushing the hollow near the collarbone, then dropping again. A reflex looking for something that was not there. When the paramedics cut his shirt away, Rachel had seen the scar tissue on his chest, not from surgery but from shrapnel. Pitted skin, a pattern that did not match any accident on a normal job site. Now, in the quiet of Bay, for Rachel adjusted the IV drip and checked the monitor again. Blood pressure was low but holding. Heart rate elevated. Oxygen saturation hovering in the low 90s, dipping when he coughed. She leaned down close enough to hear him. The breath sounded like fluid in the lungs, the kind of sound that made your stomach tighten because you knew what it meant. The kind of sound that meant he could tip from struggling to failing in a blink. Rachel smoothed the blanket over him more out of habit than sentiment. "You're safe," she said so softly it was almost just breath. "Rest." For a moment, nothing changed. Then his eyelids fluttered. Not open, just a tremor like he was trying to surface from deep water. Rachel watched him carefully, then checked his temperature again. Still high. She made a note on the chart. Antibiotics continued. Fluids, monitor, no transport. She stepped out from behind the curtain and nearly collided with a nurse pushing a supply cart. "Rachel," the nurse whispered urgently. "Voss is coming down." Rachel's eyes moved toward the double doors and caught a glimpse of a white coat and a suit beneath it. Dr. Malcolm Voss did not walk through the ER. He entered it like the space should rearrange itself for him. He was not an ER physician. He was an administrator who wore a coat as a costume. His hair was always perfect. His shoes never squeaked. His smile never reached his eyes. 2 people followed him from behind, one in a security uniform and one in a tailored suit with a tablet in his hand. They looked like men who belonged in boardrooms, not near blood. Rachel saw the staff straighten, not with respect, with fear. Pierce appeared at the nurse's station, posture stiff. Dr. Voss. Voss nodded, barely acknowledging him. His gaze scanned the room the way someone might scan a restaurant, deciding what displeased him. Then the sliding glass doors screamed open again, and the department shifted. A flurry of paramedics rolled in a gurney fast enough that the wheels rattled. On the gurney lay a young man, maybe mid-20s, hair gelled, clothes, expensive face twisted with anger and pain. "My leg," he shouted. "My leg is broken. Do you know who my father is?" One of the paramedics tried to calm him. "Sir, please, we are going to take care of you." The young man slapped at the air. "Get your hands off me. I want the best doctor here. I want a private room. I want it now." Behind the gurney, another man strode an older silver hair suit that looked custom expression cold and controlled. Elliot Wexler did not need to introduce himself. People recognized him from local news, from hospital fundraisers, from photos on glossy brochures. He glanced around the ER with a look that suggested he had never had to wait for anything. Voss's posture changed instantly. It was subtle, almost humiliating in its speed. "Mr. Wexler," Voss said brightly, stepping forward. "I was just coming down to greet you." Wexler's eyes flicked to his son. "He is in pain." Voss nodded as if pain was a problem money could solve. "We are going to take him to Trauma 1. Best equipment, best staff." Pierce moved forward, cautious. "Dr. Voss, Trauma 1 is occupied. We have multiple critical patients right now." Voss turned his head slowly. The smile remained. The eyes sharpened. "Clear it," he said. The charge nurse hesitated. "Sir, we are full." Voss looked past her scanning, and his gaze landed on Bay 4 again. The curtain was slightly open. He could see the outline of the older man on the bed, the plastic bag beneath it holding worn clothing, the emptiness beside him. No family members. No expensive suitcase, no anxious assistant. Voss pointed. "That Bay," he said. "Move that patient." Pierce's jaw tightened. "Bay 4 is critical. Severe pneumonia, arrhythmia, risk unstable vitals." Voss's expression did not change. "Then put him somewhere else and keep monitoring him." Rachel stepped forward from the curtain, voice even. "He cannot be moved to the hall. He needs continuous monitoring and oxygen support." Voss looked at her as if he was trying to place her. "And you are?" Rachel met his eyes without flinching. "Rachel Carter, ER nurse." Voss's smile widened by a fraction. "Nurse Carter, that patient is a John Doe, uninsured. Mr. Wexler funds our entire imaging expansion. His son has a compound fracture and he is in pain." Rachel spoke slowly, clearly, like she was talking to someone who did not understand triage. "A broken leg hurts. It is not immediately life-threatening. Pneumonia with respiratory distress can become fatal quickly. If you move him, you may kill him." The air in the ER shifted. Even the monitors seemed louder. A child cried in the waiting room, then quieted as if someone had covered his mouth. Wexler watched, expression unreadable, like a man observing employees argue. Voss took a step closer to Rachel, lowering his voice. "You are going to move him." "No," Rachel said. It was one word, not shouted, not dramatic, just firm. Pierce's eyes flicked between them. Voss blinked as if he had misheard. Then his face flushed. "Excuse me." Rachel did not move. "No, not to the hallway, not to the waiting room. He is unstable." Voss's tone sharpened. "Nurse Carter, you do not get to make operational decisions. I decide resource allocation in this facility." Rachel's voice remained flat. "You decide budgets, I decide what is safe for my patient." Voss leaned in slightly. His breath smelled faintly of mint. "You think you are saving the world. You are not. You are a nurse. You follow orders." Rachel's eyes stayed on his. "Every patient matters." A murmur of discomfort moved through the staff. Someone behind the nurse's station quietly stopped typing. Wexler's son groaned dramatically on the gurney. "Dad, do something. This is ridiculous. I'm in pain." Wexler lifted a hand, silencing his son without looking at him. "Malcolm," he said calmly, "I do not care where you put me. I care that my son is treated." Voss nodded quickly. "Of course, Mr. Wexler, of course." Then he turned back to Rachel, and the warmth drained from his face. "Move the vagrant," he said. Louder now, so others could hear. Rachel felt the cold knot in her stomach tighten. It was not fear for herself. It was anger, hot and steady. She pictured the older man's chest rising with difficulty. She pictured him in a hallway surrounded by noise oxygen-lined tangled monitor out of reach, a sudden drop in saturation unnoticed. No, she repeated. Voss's jaw worked. His control was slipping, and he hated that it was happening in front of Wexler. He stepped closer again, invading her space. He is soaking up resources. Mr. Wexler writes checks that keep your department open. Do you understand that? Rachel did not back up. I understand that you are asking me to compromise care for money. Voss's eyes narrowed. I am asking you to respect reality. Rachel's voice hardened, still quiet. Reality is a human being struggling to breathe. Pierce made a small sound like he wanted to speak, then stopped. Rachel could see the calculation in his face. His mortgage. His student loans. The way administrators could make a doctor's life miserable without ever raising a hand. Voss's gaze flicked to Pierce. Dr. Pierce? You are the attending. Order her to move him. Pierce swallowed. Dr. Voss, we can place Wexler in a standard room with ortho consult. He is stable. Bay 4 is not. Voss's smile returned, but it was thin and sharp. That is not what I asked. Rachel saw Pierce's hands clench at his sides. Wexler's son shouted again. This is insane. I'm not waiting like a poor person. The words hung in the air like a stain. Rachel turned her head slightly toward the young man. You are not dying, she said. He might be. The son stared at her offended, as if she had spoken out of turn in a social club. What did you say to me? Rachel turned back to Voss. I am not moving him. Voss's voice dropped. You are forcing my hand. Rachel's expression did not change. Voss's eyes went to the curtain again. He reached out, fingers curling as if he could simply pull it back and take what he wanted. Rachel's hand moved on instinct fast and controlled, catching his wrist before he touched the fabric. It was not violent. It was not a grab that left marks. It was a stop, a boundary placed in flesh. Voss froze, shock flaring across his face. Rachel's voice was low, and for the first time there was something in it that made even the seasoned nurses glance up. Do not touch my patient. For a fraction of a second the ER was silent except for the monitor beeping behind the curtain. Then Voss jerked his arm back as if she had burned him. He looked at his wrist, then at her outrage swelling. Security, he barked. Now. The guards who had been hovering near the doors stepped forward uncertainly. Voss pointed at Rachel like he was pointing at a problem that needed to be removed. Escort Nurse Carter to my office. Rachel glanced toward the Bay 4 and saw Pierce standing, rigid eyes tight. She saw fear in him, but also something else, something like shame. She leaned close enough that only he could hear. Do not let them move him, she said. Pierce's throat worked. Rachel, I cannot fight him. Rachel's gaze sharpened. Then at least watch him. Pierce nodded once small. The guards approached. One of them cleared his throat. Ma'am, please? Rachel took one last look toward the curtain, toward the monitor that kept time for the man whose name nobody knew. Then she turned and walked with them, posture straight, hands relaxed at her sides. As they passed the waiting room, Rachel caught glimpses through glass. People sitting shoulder to shoulder. A woman holding her purse like a shield. A man staring at the floor, eyes glassy, breathing shallow. The noise of coughs and murmurs pressed against the walls. Upstairs, the elevator opened onto a different world. Carpeted halls, soft lighting, a reception desk with a bowl of candy that nobody in the ER would ever have time to eat. Voss walked ahead of her without looking back, as if Rachel were already gone. In the office, he did not ask her to sit. He sat himself, pulling a form from a drawer, as if he had rehearsed this moment. He clicked a pen. The sound was too loud. Insubordination, he said, writing hard. Refusal to follow direct orders. Physical aggression toward a superior. Rachel stood still. I protected a patient. Voss looked up, eyes glittering with satisfaction. You assaulted me. Rachel's voice stayed calm. There are cameras. Voss smiled. There are cameras I control. The words landed heavy. Rachel felt something shift inside her, a recognition of how stacked the system was. She had known it, but hearing it, stated so plainly, made it colder. Voss signed the paper with a flourish. "You are terminated effective immediately. I will report you to the board. You will not work in this city again." Rachel stared at the paper without reaching for it. "Sign," Voss said. "Admission of guilt. If you sign, I will not press charges." Rachel unclipped her badge, placed it on the desk, and met his eyes. "I will not sign." Voss leaned forward, voice silky. "Then you will be escorted out. You have 20 minutes to leave this property." Rachel turned without slamming the door. She walked back to the elevator, the hallway quiet enough that she could hear her own heartbeat. Down in the basement locker room, she moved on autopilot, packing her things with the efficiency of someone trained to keep personal belongings small. A spare set of scrubs, a stethoscope, a photo tucked into the back corner of the locker, faces in uniform squinting into sunlight. Her fingers brushed a worn coin medal cool against her skin. She closed her fist around it for a moment, then let it fall back into the bag. Her phone buzzed. A message from Pierce. Rachel stared at it, the words blurring for half a second before they sharpened. "I am sorry. They moved him. Hallway by the vending machines." "I tried." Rachel's grip tightened until her knuckles went pale. She shoved the phone into her pocket, zipped her bag, and walked out, steps quick and controlled. She did not head for the exit yet. She headed for Bay 4. Rachel did not slow until the smell changed. The executive floors carried quiet like perfume. Down here, the air tasted like old coffee disinfectant and human stress. The corridor outside the emergency department vending machines was a narrow artery between chaos and neglect, a place where stretchers collected when nobody wanted to admit they were out of room. Her shoes squeaked once on the wax tile. Then she saw him. The older man lay on a gurney, pushed tight against the wall as if he were a piece of equipment. The blanket had slipped, exposing a forearm mottled with bruises and needle marks. His chest rose in shallow, wet pulls. Each breath sounded like it had to push through water. The oxygen cannula was still on his face, but the tubing had kinked under the rail. The flow meter on the portable tank read low. Rachel's stomach tightened. A security guard stood 10 feet away, arms crossed, eyes tracking her like she was a problem that might move. "Ma'am," he said, already stepping in, "you can't be back here." Rachel ignored him. She checked the man's pulse, then the temperature of his skin. Burning hot. Damp with sweat. His lips were turning a shade that made her chest feel tight. She lifted the oxygen tubing, straightened the kink, then turned the flow up a notch. The man's eyelids fluttered. Rachel leaned closer. "Stay with me," she murmured, her voice quiet but firm. His breathing rasped, then hitched. He tried to cough and couldn't clear it. The sound was thick, deep, the kind that meant the lungs were losing the fight. Rachel looked around. No monitor, no suction, no crash cart, just a hallway full of people pretending not to see. "Get me a pulse ox," she called over her shoulder, not looking away from the patient. "Now." A nurse in scrubs paused near the elevators, eyes wide. She glanced toward the security guard, then toward Rachel, caught between fear and instinct. "Rachel, you're not supposed to be here," the nurse whispered. "Pulse ox," Rachel repeated. The nurse hesitated, then turned and jogged toward the supply room like she had just made a decision she would have to live with. The security guard stepped closer. "Ma'am, I need you to move away from the patient." Rachel finally looked up at him. He was young, maybe mid-20s, with the rigid posture of someone who had been hired to be a wall and had never been asked to think beyond it. His badge read Harris. "Harris," Rachel said, reading it without effort. "He's desaturating." Harris swallowed. "Dr. Voss said you have to leave." Rachel's voice stayed level. "If he stops breathing, you will call a code, and you will tell them exactly where he is." Harris's jaw tightened. "Ma'am." Rachel leaned back over the gurney. The man's hand twitched, fingers curling against the blanket as if searching for something. His wrist was hot to the touch. His pulse was fast and thready. She listened to his chest with the small stethoscope she had kept in her bag. The sound was wet and crackling like rain on a cheap tent. Her mind ran through options with the brutal clarity that came when you had no time for emotion. He needed antibiotics and pressors and a bed with a monitor. He needed suction and a physician who would sign orders without flinching. He needed to be back behind a curtain where a nurse could watch him, not out here, where he could die in plain sight and be stepped around like a spill. Rachel straightened, scanning the corridor. People moved past, eyes sliding away. A man with a stroller slowed, saw the gurney, then hurried on. A woman with a visitor badge clutched her coffee tighter and turned her head. Rachel felt a familiar heat rise in her chest. Not panic, rage. Controlled, clean. She leaned toward the patient again. "I'm here," she said softly. "Breathe for me." His eyelids fluttered. For a second, his gaze snagged on her face as if something in him recognized her even through fever. His lips parted. A sound came out broken and hoarse. Not a name, not a plea. A word shaped by an old habit. "Echo," he rasped. Rachel froze so hard it was like someone had pressed pause on her body. The hallway noise blurred. The vending machine hum deepened. Her ears caught only his voice the way it pushed through damaged lungs. "Echo 1, he forced out his grip, tightening around her wrist with a strength that did not match his thin frame. Rachel's throat went tight. She did not ask what he meant. She did not need to. Echo 1 was not something civilians said by accident. It was not something you hallucinated unless it was burned into you. Her mouth moved before her mind could weigh it. "Echo 1, she echoed back, low, steady. His eyes widened a fraction. Relief moved through his face like a shadow lifting. He tried to speak again. His tongue felt thick. His breath whistled. Getty coughed. The bird. Rachel's pulse spiked. Bird, extraction, landing zone, call signs. A vocabulary from a world where minutes were the difference between living and being zipped into a bag. Harris touched Rachel's shoulder firmer now. "Ma'am, you have to leave." Rachel shrugged his hand off without violence. "Do not touch me," she said, her voice cutting clean through him. The patient's grip loosened. His eyes fluttered. Rachel leaned close. "What's your name?" she asked, urgent but quiet. "Can you tell me your name?" His lips moved again. No name came. Only breath, only fever. Rachel's mind raced. If he was military, his identity mattered. Not for prestige, for treatment. For resources that might appear if the right system was pinged. For the possibility that someone out there was missing him and still looking. But his wrist was bare. No bracelet, no tag. The nurse from earlier returned breathless, holding a pulse oximeter like it was contraband. "Here," she whispered. Rachel clipped it to the man's finger. The number blinked, searching, then settled. 87. Rachel's jaw tightened. She increased the oxygen again, watching the number crawl upward by 1 point, then stall. The nurse's eyes flicked toward the security guard and back. "Rachel, if Voss sees you." Rachel did not answer. She stared at the oximeter, then at the man's face, then at the thin oxygen tank that was already nearing empty. "Get another tank," she said. The nurse hesitated. "I can't just—" "Get it," Rachel repeated, and this time the nurse moved instantly. Harris shifted his weight, uncertain now. He was seeing something he did not know how to label. A nurse, on the edge of being trespassed out, still working like the hallway was her trauma bay. Rachel's phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it. It buzzed again. Rachel did not look away from the patient when she answered, thumb-sliding without checking the screen. Pierce came. The voice strained. "Rachel, where are you?" "In the hallway," she said. "With him." Pierce's breath caught. "Rachel, security is looking for you. Voss is furious." He moved a critical patient, Rachel said. Her voice stayed calm, but the words had teeth. "His sats are dropping," Rachel Pierce said, and she could hear the fight in him, the part that wanted to do the right thing and the part that knew the cost. "I tried to stop it. He threatened to pull my privileges." Rachel did not answer with comfort. She did not have any. "Get me a bed," she said. "Get him back into a bay." Pierce's voice lowered. "I can't. Trauma 1 is being cleared for Wexler." Rachel's eyes flicked toward the emergency department doors. She could imagine it without seeing. The donor's son on a clean bed, nurses fluffing pillows, Voss smiling like a salesman. Rachel's grip tightened around her phone. "He can wait." Pierce swallowed. "Rachel." "I agree with you. But Voss is in charge of staffing and scheduling and ethics," Rachel said. Or does he outsource that too? Pierce went silent for a beat. Rachel, he said again, quieter. Leave, please. If they arrest you, I can't help you. Rachel stared at the patient's face. She watched his chest struggle. She watched the oximeter flicker down 1 point. I'm not leaving him like this, she said. She hung up. Harris stepped forward again, voice firmer, embarrassed now. Ma'am, I'm calling the police if you don't leave. Rachel looked up at him. Call them, she said, and tell them you watched a man die because your boss wanted a donor happy. Harris's face flushed. His eyes darted away. Footsteps approached, fast and purposeful, the click of expensive shoes that never belonged in hallways like this. Rachel did not need to turn to know who it was. The air changed around certain people the way a room tightened when power walked in. Dr. Malcolm Voss appeared at the corner with 2 more security staff behind him. His white coat was crisp. His expression was controlled fury. He took in the scene in one glance, the gurney, the pulse ox. Rachel, kneeling beside a patient she was no longer allowed to touch. His smile did not appear this time. What did I say? Voss asked. Rachel stood slowly, keeping her body between Voss and the gurney without making a show of it. You said leave, she replied. And yet Voss said, voice smooth, here you are. Practicing without privileges. Trespassing. Interfering with care. Rachel's gaze did not flinch. There is no care here. There is a hallway. Voss leaned in slightly, careful to keep his voice low, like he understood optics. You are done, Nurse Carter. You do not get to stage a protest in my hospital. Rachel's voice stayed level. He is unstable. He needs monitoring. Voss's eyes flicked toward the pulse oximeter. Then the staff on duty can handle it. Rachel let out a short breath that was not laughter. You mean the staff who were too scared to say no? Voss's nostrils flared. Security, he said without looking away from Rachel. Escort her out, now. Harris hesitated. Rachel saw it. A crack in obedience. A fraction of discomfort. He glanced at the patient, then back at Voss like he was doing math he did not want the answer to. Voss's voice sharpened. No, Harris. Harris swallowed and stepped forward. Rachel did not back up. She leaned closer to the gurney, lowering her voice toward the patient. I'm going to get you help, she said softly. Stay with me. The man's eyes fluttered. His fingers twitched again, then fell still. Rachel straightened as Harris took her elbow. Do not touch me, Rachel said, not loud, but clear enough that the other guards paused. Harris's hand loosened. Ma'am, please. Voss smiled with a flash of teeth. She likes to pretend she's in control. Let her pretend while you walk her out. Rachel looked at Voss. If he dies, it will be on your hands. Voss's expression did not change. If he dies, it will be because he was already dying. And you, Nurse Carter, will be gone. Rachel felt the sting of it, not because it was clever, but because it was the kind of cruelty that hid behind plausible deniability. The kind that kept men like Voss clean. As the guards guided her toward the exit, Rachel twisted her head back toward the gurney. The nurse who had helped her stood frozen with a fresh oxygen tank in her hands, eyes wide, caught between orders and conscience. Rachel met her gaze for 1 second. Put it on him, Rachel said, and do not let them forget he is here. The nurse nodded, small and fierce. Voss stepped closer to the nurse and spoke quietly, but Rachel caught the words anyway. Do your job, Voss said, and remember who signs your paycheck. Rachel was pushed through the emergency department doors. The sound hit her like a wall. Phones ringing, a child screaming, a nurse calling for respiratory. The bright, brutal normal of suffering continuing without pause. Near Trauma 1, she caught a glimpse through parted curtains. Graham. Wexler lay on the bed leg, propped up, scrolling on his phone. 2 nurses hovered near him, hands smoothing sheets, voices gentle. His father stood near the foot of the bed. Face, unreadable, eyes tracking movement with the focus of a man used to controlling rooms. Voss approached Wexler with that polished smile again, as if he could switch masks like flipping a light. Mr. Wexler, Voss said warmly. We are taking excellent care of your son. Wexler did not smile back. He glanced toward the hall, toward the direction Rachel had come from. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger and calculation. "Who was that?" Wexler asked. Voss's smile tightened. "A former employee who became disruptive." Wexler's gaze stayed on the hallway for a beat longer than necessary. Then he looked at his son, who was groaning theatrically. "My pain meds better not be delayed," the son snapped. Wexler did not respond. He watched the monitor above the bed, as if he was learning something about who people were when money was on the line. Rachel was pushed into the main lobby. The scent changed again. Citrus and polish. The quiet hum of wealth. Patients in designer coats sat in upholstered chairs sipping bottled water. A pianist played softly near the wall, the notes floating like denial. Rachel's jeans felt heavy with damp. Her gray shirt clung to her back. She suddenly looked out of place, not because she was dirty, but because she belonged to a different world than this. The guards walked her to the sliding doors. Outside, the morning was cold and wet. Norfolk rain came down in thin sheets, not dramatic, just relentless. The pavement shone black. Cars hissed by on the street. Harris stopped at the threshold. His voice was lower now, less scripted. "Ma'am, please don't make this harder." Rachel looked at him. Harder than what? Harris swallowed. "They'll call the cops." Rachel nodded once. "Let them." She stepped out into the rain. For a moment, she just stood there, rain hitting her hair, soaking her shirt, cooling the heat in her chest. She took a breath and felt her lungs expand, then tighten again, as if even breathing was something the building behind her could take away. She walked toward the bus stop at the edge of the campus, the one with the warped bench and the smeared route map. She sat down. The bench was wet. The cold seeped through denim. Her bag rested at her feet. Inside it were folded scrubs, a stethoscope, a photo, a coin that felt heavier than metal. She stared at the hospital entrance. People came and went, heads down, umbrellas up, lives moving. Rachel's phone buzzed again. She looked this time. A message from the nurse who had helped her, a name Rachel barely knew. He coughed up blood. "Sats are falling. They will not move him back." Rachel's jaw clenched. She typed with wet fingers. "Stay with him. Call Pierce. Call a code if he drops." Her thumb hovered over the screen. Then another message came through, this time from Pierce. "Rachel, I am trying. Voss ordered security to keep you out. He has staff watching the hall." Rachel stared at the words until they blurred. Her mind kept replaying the older man's grip on her wrist, the clarity in his eyes when she repeated the call sign, the way his face had softened like he had found something familiar in a place that had none. Echo 1. Bird. Rachel's throat tightened around a memory she did not want to touch. A different smell. Burning dust, diesel, blood and sand. A different kind of hallway made of canvas and plywood. Hands moving fast under dim light. She forced herself back into the rain and the city and the wet bench. She pressed her palm to her pocket where the coin sat. The ridged edge bit into her skin. The world did not feel safe when you were visible. It was safer when you were nobody. It was safer when you kept your head down and did your shift and went home and did not make enemies. Rachel had tried to live like that. Then a man in a suit told her a human being was a vagrant, and she had said no. She stared at the hospital roofline water sliding down the glass. The building looked indifferent, like it could swallow anything and never change. Then the sound came. At first, it was so low, she thought it was thunder rolling in from the coast. A vibration in the air more than a noise. Then it became rhythm, a deep, heavy pulse that hit the chest before it hit the ears. Whump, whump, whump. Rachel's head lifted slowly. Her breath caught. She knew that sound the way a body knows fire is hot. She stood up, rain running down her face like sweat. Over the city skyline, cutting through the gray, a helicopter came in low. Not the red and white medical transport that sometimes landed on Bayview Meridian. This one was dark. Military lines, purposeful approach. Then a second appeared behind it, banking wide. Cars slowed on the street. People stepped out of the lobby and looked up, mouths open. A valet pointed, forgetting his posture. The lead helicopter did not circle. It came straight in, hovering over the roof with an aggression that made the building seem small. The noise became physical. It shook the bus stop sign. It rattled the glass doors. Rachel felt the vibration in her teeth. Her phone buzzed hard, vibrating against her palm like a warning. She looked down. Pierce. She answered. "Jonah," she said, voice tight. "What is happening?" Pierce sounded like he was shouting into chaos. "Rachel, you need to come back. Now." Rachel stared at the helicopter above the hospital roof, rain whipping sideways under the rotor wash. "I can't," she said. "I'm fired." "You don't understand," Pierce said. His voice cracked. "Military police just came through the emergency department doors. They have rifles. They did not check in. A helicopter landed on the roof without clearance. The pilot is demanding to speak to you." Rachel's grip tightened on the phone. "To me?" Pierce's breathing was loud on the line. At first, they asked for the charge nurse. Then, they asked for Carter. Rachel's stomach dropped. Pierce's voice lowered as if he was afraid of being overheard. "Rachel, they are not calling you Nurse Carter." Rachel felt the rain on her skin, cold and real, while something older rose up beneath it. "What are they calling me?" she asked. Pierce swallowed. "Lieutenant Commander Carter." Rachel closed her eyes for a fraction of a second. When she opened them, the helicopter was still there, hovering like a verdict over the roof. She did not look at the hospital doors. She started running. Rachel ran through the rain like it was trying to hold her back. Water slapped her face, soaked through her shirt, turned the pavement into a mirror that blurred every light into streaks. Her shoes hit concrete in hard, fast beats. The hospital entrance swelled in front of her glass doors, reflecting a woman who looked like she had crawled out of the ocean and decided not to drown. The helicopter's roar pressed down on everything, a heavy rhythm that made people stop mid-step. Valets stood frozen under the awning. Visitors in expensive coats stared up, mouths open, hands clutching phones that suddenly seemed too small to capture what was happening. Rachel shoved through the sliding doors. Inside the lobby, the air was cool and perfumed, but the sound was wrong. Not music, not polite conversation. This was controlled panic voices layered over each other. Footsteps moving too fast for a place that was built to pretend nothing urgent ever happened. Military police in dark gear flooded the marble floor in clean lines. Not running, not shouting. Moving like a unit that had trained for hallways, for doors, for people in their way. Rifles held tight muzzles, angled down but ready. Their eyes scanned corners and stairwells, not the gift shop. At the center of the lobby, Malcolm Voss was shouting at a wall of uniforms, like volume could bend authority. "This is private property," he snapped, face flushed finger stabbing the air. "You cannot land a military aircraft on my roof. I will sue the Department of Defense. I will have names. I will have badges." A Marine at the elevator did not blink. He looked past Voss as if Voss were just air. A voice carried over a radio from somewhere near the front desk. "Clear, unemotional. Team Alpha, secure emergency. Team Bravo, secure administration. Locate HVI. Condition critical." Voss spun toward the nearest officer. "Who is in charge here?" The officer turned with a precision that made Voss recoil half a step. His uniform was crisp under a tactical vest face set like stone. A name tape sat above his chest. "Captain Luke Harper." "Step back, sir," Harper said, voice flat. "You are obstructing a federal operation." "A federal operation," Voss repeated, incredulous. "In my hospital." Harper's gaze flicked once toward the ceiling, then back. "Yes." Rachel stopped just inside the doors, chest heaving. Nobody noticed her at first. Everyone was staring at the rifles, the radios, the helicopter sound beating through the roof. Then a man entered through the rain and the lobby changed again. He was older, broad-shouldered, wearing dress uniform beneath a dark coat that still carried raindrops like beads of oil. The rank on his collar caught the lobby lights and did not apologize for it. General Marcus Keene moved through the civilians like water parting rock. 2 military police flanked him, and between them walked Rachel. For a split second, she realized how it looked from the outside. A soaked former nurse escorted by armed men. A hospital director already furious now given a new target. Voss's head snapped toward her. His eyes widened then narrowed into something sharp. "You," he hissed. "You are trespassing. I fired you. Get her out of here." Keene did not look at him. He looked at Rachel. "Lieutenant Commander Carter," he said. Rachel's breath caught not because she was surprised by the title, but because hearing it aloud in this lobby felt like a door slamming behind her. She nodded once. "General." Voss stared as if the floor had tilted. Harper's eyes flicked to Rachel with the smallest shift of recognition. Keene's voice remained calm. "Status." Rachel did not waste time on explanations. The patient they moved into the hallway. "He has severe pneumonia and unstable vitals. If he was shifted, he could be tamponading." Keene's jaw tightened. "Where is he now?" Rachel pointed toward the corridor that led to the ER hallway near the vending machines. Voss barked a laugh. "This is insane. She is a nurse. A fired nurse. She does not have privileges. This is my facility." Keene turned his head slightly, finally acknowledging Voss the way you acknowledge a noise. "That man is Admiral Samuel Granger Keene," said voice low and deadly. "Retired. And if he dies because of what happened inside this building, the consequences will not be handled by your legal team." Voss's face drained of color. "That is not possible. That man is a John Doe. He was found under a bridge." Keene did not blink, move. Harper raised his hand and his team flowed forward. A civilian family tried to step into the path. A Marine guided them aside with a firm palm and a quiet word. It was not cruel, it was absolute. Rachel moved with them, feet, quick eyes scanning. The elevator doors opened and closed as teams split. One group went up toward administration. Another headed toward the ER. Voss lunged a step after them. "You cannot take over my emergency department. There are patients." Harper stopped long enough to look at him. "Then you should have treated them," Harper said, and kept walking. Rachel pushed through the ER doors, and the smell hit her like a slap. Disinfectant and blood and stale coffee and human fear. The noise was louder here, layered over the helicopter vibration. Staff stood clustered near the nurses' station, faces pale. A few were crying quietly. A few looked angry. Nobody looked in control. Dr. Jonah Pierce spotted Rachel, and relief flashed across his face like light from a match. "Rachel," he said, stepping toward her. "Thank God." Rachel did not slow. "Where is he?" Pierce pointed. "Hallway, vending machines." Rachel saw the gurney immediately shoved against the wall where she had left it, oxygen tank now attached, tubing straightened. The nurse who had helped her earlier stood near the foot of the gurney, hands trembling as she tried to look busy and not terrified at the same time. Admiral Granger's skin had turned gray. His lips were tinted blue. His breathing was a wet rattle that sounded like someone shaking a bag of stones. Rachel's world narrowed. She stepped to the gurney, put her fingers on the carotid. Pulse was there, fast, weak. She listened to his chest, then leaned close to his mouth, catching the smell of fever and old smoke and something metallic. "Sir," she said quietly, as if volume might push him away. "I'm here." His eyelids fluttered but did not open. Pierce hovered beside her eyes, frantic. "We need to get him back into a bay." Voss ordered he stays out here. Rachel looked up at him sharply. What were his SATs? Low 80s at one point. "We got him up to 88 with oxygen. He's deteriorating." Rachel's gaze flicked to the man's neck veins, slightly distended. She felt her stomach tighten. She placed her stethoscope against Granger's chest again and listened. The heart sounds were muffled, distant, like a drum behind a wall. Rachel straightened. "He's tamponading." Pierce blinked. "From what?" Rachel's eyes went flat. Old shrapnel. If he was moved, it could have shifted. He could have a small ventricular laceration and blood collecting in the pericardium. Pierce's face went paler. "We need surgery." Rachel scanned the bays. Trauma 2 was occupied. Trauma 3 was occupied. Every curtain held a human being and a monitor that mattered. Then she looked toward Trauma 1, the VIP bay. She could see through the slit in the curtain. a clean bed, clean sheets. Graham Wexler propped up phone and hand leg elevated like he was posing for a photo. Two nurses hovered, one smoothing his pillow, the other offering water. Elliot Wexler stood near the door, arms crossed, eyes moving, taking in everything. He saw Rachel looking. Their gazes met for a beat. Wexler's expression did not soften, but something in his eyes shifted. Not approval. Not guilt. Attention. Rachel turned back to Pierce. Clear trauma 1. Pierce's mouth opened. Rachel, that's Wexler's son. Voss is in there with them. Rachel's voice sharpened. This man is dying. Harper stepped in behind her, listening. What do you need? Rachel did not hesitate. A trauma bay. Now. Crash cart, blood, suction, and I need the hallway cleared. Harper nodded once and raised his radio. Clear trauma 1, now. Move civilians out of this corridor. A Marine team moved, not fast like panic, fast like training. Voss appeared at the edge of the hallway, drawn by the commotion, eyes wild. He saw Rachel over the gurney, saw Harper's men, saw Keene entering behind them. This is my emergency department, Voss shouted. You cannot touch that patient. She cannot touch that patient. Keene's voice cut through. Dr. Voss. Voss turned toward him, anger and fear fighting for control. General, this is malpractice. That woman has no privileges. She is not licensed to perform any procedure in this hospital. Rachel looked up, eyes cold. You moved him. Voss's mouth opened. I moved a vagrant to make room for a donor. That is not a crime. Keene stepped closer. It might be. Rachel did not waste breath. We are losing him. Pierce looked down at the monitor they had brought on a portable unit. The numbers were ugly. Rachel, he said, voice tight. He's dropping. Rachel's hands moved. She adjusted the oxygen, checked for a pulse again. Crash cart, she called louder now. Now. A nurse pushed it forward, wheels rattling. Harper's Marines surged toward trauma 1. Rachel turned and walked straight for the curtain. Behind her, she heard Wexler's son complaining. This is insane. Dad, tell them they can't do this. Rachel reached the curtain and ripped it open in one motion. Graham Wexler stared at her, offended, as if she had broken into his hotel room. Are you kidding me? He snapped. I'm the patient here. Rachel's voice was flat. Get out! Wexler's eyes widened. Excuse me. Elliot Wexler stepped forward slightly. Nurse Carter. Rachel did not look at him yet. She was watching Graham's face, watching the way entitlement sat on him like a crown. Your leg is broken, Rachel said. You are stable. He is dying. Graham scoffed. My father donates millions to this place. You're fired. You can't talk to me like that. Rachel finally looked at Elliot Wexler. You saw him, she said, in the hallway. Wexler's eyes flicked toward the open bay door where the Marines waited. His expression tightened. I saw something, he said carefully. Rachel's gaze did not soften. Then decide what kind of man you want to be in this room. Voss barreled in behind her, voice rising. Stop this right now. Harper, you are violating hospital protocol. Harper did not look at Voss. He gestured and 2 Marines stepped forward. Graham sat up shouting. You can't touch me. Get your hands off my bed. The Marines lifted the gurney with practiced ease as if they were moving cargo and rolled him straight out into the corridor. Graham's voice echoed as he was pushed past curtains and staring staff. This is humiliating. Dad, do something. Wexler did not follow immediately. He stayed for a beat watching Rachel. Is he really that bad? He asked quietly, his voice stripped of performance. Rachel's eyes stayed on the hallway where Admiral Granger lay. Yes. Wexler's jaw worked. He glanced at Voss, then back at Rachel. Do what you have to do, he said, and stepped aside. Voss stared at him, stunned. You can't be serious, Voss whispered. Wexler's voice was calm but edged. Malcolm, you told me this hospital was the best. I do not pay for cruelty. Get out of her way. Rachel did not wait to see Voss's reaction. She ran back to the gurney. Move him in, she ordered. The trauma team moved. The gurney rolled into trauma 1. Monitors were slapped on, leads placed. Blood pressure cuff tightened. The alarms immediately began to scream. Pierce stared at the numbers. He's crashing. Rachel listened again. Muffled heart sounds. Distended neck veins. Hypotension. Tamponade. Every second now mattered. Epinephrine, Rachel said. 1 milligram. Start compressions if he loses pulse. Get blood ready. Get me a central line kit. A nurse hesitated, eyes darting. Rachel, you're not on staff. Harper's voice cut in. Follow her orders. The nurse moved. Keene stood at the foot of the bed, watching Rachel with a strange mix of fear and pride, like a man seeing a weapon he had prayed he would never need to use again. Voss stumbled into the bay, breathing hard. This is a lawsuit. This is a catastrophe. Rachel did not look at him. She watched the monitor and the Admiral's face. His skin was waxy, his breathing shallow, his pulse thread thinning. Pierce's voice broke. He's losing it. The monitor chirped, then shifted. No pulse, a nurse called. Rachel's voice became iron. Start compressions. Hands pressed down on Granger's chest in hard, rhythmic pushes. His body jolted with each compression. Bag him, Rachel said. 2 breaths for every 30. Keep the seal. Pierce looked at Rachel, desperation flooding his eyes. We need a surgeon, now. Rachel glanced toward the door. How far is the flight surgeon? Keene spoke into his radio, listening, then answered. 3 minutes. Rachel's jaw tightened. He will not last 3 minutes. Pierce's breathing went shallow. Rachel, what are you thinking? Rachel's eyes flicked across the room, taking in instruments, people, blood products, the crash cart. She looked at Pierce. Can you do a thoracotomy? Pierce stared at her. You mean, open his chest? Yes. Pierce swallowed. His hands shook. I am not a trauma surgeon. Rachel held his gaze. Then he dies. Pierce's throat worked. He glanced at Granger's face, then at the monitor, screaming. I can't, he whispered. I will kill him. Voss seized the moment, voice sharp with triumph. Exactly. You see, this is not her place. Get out. Let the professionals handle it. Rachel turned her head slightly toward Voss. Her eyes were cold enough to make him stop talking. Record this, she said. Voss blinked. What? Rachel's voice stayed steady. Record it for your lawyers. She reached for the scalpel. The bay seemed to hold its breath. Pierce watched her hands. Nurses froze for a fraction of a second, caught between horror and hope. Harper stepped closer, not interfering, but ready. Keene's jaw tightened. Rachel placed the scalpel against the Admiral's chest. Her hands were steady. She cut. The incision was swift and controlled. Skin parted, blood welled. A nurse moved on instinct with gauze. Another stepped in with suction. Rachel's voice remained calm, clinical, stripped of emotion because emotion cost time. Retractors, she said. Pierce snapped out of shock and grabbed the spreaders. He inserted them and cranked. The chest opened with a sound that made one nurse turn away, swallowing bile. Pierce stared, voice barely audible. Jesus! Rachel leaned in, eyes narrowing. The pericardial sac bulged purple and tense, swollen with blood. Tamponade confirmed, Rachel said. Pericardium is under pressure. She made a small cut. Dark blood surged out heavy and hot. The pressure released like a valve opening. Beneath it, the heart shuddered. Then beat. Once. Twice. A weak rhythm returned, fragile as a candle flame in wind. We have a rhythm. Pierce breathed, voice cracking. The monitor shifted, the scream of flatline replaced by rapid beeps. Blood pressure, a nurse called. 60/40. Rising. Rachel's hands moved deeper, searching. Suction, she said. The nurse pressed the suction tip into the cavity, clearing blood, making the world visible. Rachel's eyes caught the source. There, she said. Right ventricle, small laceration. Pierce stared, sweat dripping down his temple. If you stitch that, you could nick the coronary. Rachel did not look up. I know. Pierce's voice trembled. We need a cardiothoracic surgeon. Rachel glanced toward the door. Flight surgeon. Keene's radio crackled. He listened, then spoke. 2 minutes. Rachel's jaw tightened. He does not have 2 minutes. Voss whispered from the corner, voice gone small. You're going to kill him. Rachel ignored him. She held out her hand. Suture, 40 proline, needle driver. A nurse slapped the instrument into her palm. Pierce stared at her hands. Rachel, how do you know? Rachel's voice stayed flat. Hold the field. She placed the needle carefully. The heart beat against her fingers, slippery and alive. She drove the first stitch with precision, not too deep, not too shallow. She tied. The bleeding slowed but did not stop. Second stitch. The heart pushed back like it wanted to fight her. She tied again. The bleeding diminished further. Rachel leaned closer, eyes narrowed, breath controlled. Third stitch. Then a final knot. The bleeding stopped. The heart beat stronger, freed from pressure and leaking less with each beat. Pierce stared at the monitor like it was a miracle. Blood pressure, the nurse called, voice shaking with relief. 80/50, 90/60. Sinus rhythm, another said. Rachel stepped back, hands raised, blood dripping from her fingers into the basin. Do not close, she said. Pack. Keep the chest open for the flight surgeon to inspect. The bay erupted into movement. Blood bags hung. Gauze packed. Instruments placed. Rachel moved to the sink and turned the water on. Blood swirled down the drain in spirals. Her hands began to shake now. Not during, after. Pierce stood beside her, breathing hard. That was insane, he whispered. Rachel did not look at him. He's alive. Pierce swallowed. Who are you? Rachel's eyes flicked up for a second, then away. Someone who has done it before. The doors swung open, and a man in flight suit rushed in, followed by a small military medical team carrying equipment. The lead doctor moved fast to the open chest eyes, scanning the repair. He looked up at Pierce. Nice work, he said automatically. Pierce shook his head, almost laughing from stress. Not me. The flight surgeon's gaze shifted to Rachel. He took in the soaked gray shirt, the blood on her arms, the way she stood like she belonged in chaos. His eyes narrowed as recognition flickered. Lieutenant Commander Carter, he said, voice changing. I heard you were here. Rachel's jaw tightened. He's stable enough to move. The surgeon inspected the sutures again, then nodded once. Because of you. Yes. They began transferring Admiral Granger to a portable transport unit moving with practiced speed. Tubes secured. Lines checked. Monitor attached. Oxygen increased. As they lifted him, Granger's eyes fluttered open. He looked around, wildly disoriented, the panic of fever and memory surging. He tried to pull at the tubing. Easy, the surgeon said, pressing a hand gently to his shoulder. You're safe. Granger's gaze caught on Rachel. For a second, the panic eased. His lips moved. Echo, he rasped. Rachel stepped closer and took his hand firm. I'm here, she said quietly. Breathe. His grip tightened, then loosened as medication began to take hold. The transport team rolled him out toward the elevators that led to the roof access. Keene turned to Rachel, voice low. You saved him. Rachel wiped her hands on a towel that turned pink immediately. I operated without hospital privileges. Keene reached into his coat and pulled out folded paperwork. You did not, he said. Rachel's eyes narrowed. Keene held the paper out. As of 800 hours this morning, you were returned to active duty status for the duration of this operation. You followed orders. Rachel stared at the signature. Her throat tightened. You reactivated me in a helicopter. Keene's expression did not soften. It was the fastest way to protect you and to take jurisdiction from anyone in this building who thinks they can bury what happened. Voss stepped forward, sputtering. That is ridiculous. You cannot retroactively change her status. This is my hospital. Keene turned toward him fully now. Dr. Voss Keene said, voice calm. You should worry less about her status and more about your billing department. Voss blinked. My what? Harper entered the bay holding a tablet. General, we ran the Admiral's identity through your system. Pension deposits have been consistent. No withdrawals for months. Keene's eyes narrowed, which means someone was monitoring him. Or he was hiding. Voss tried to recover his arrogance. That has nothing to do with this hospital. Harper's voice stayed flat. It does. Your hospital billed the Department of Veterans Affairs for 3 weeks of inpatient treatment for Admiral Granger. Voss's mouth opened, no sound came out. Pierce stared. 3 weeks. Rachel's eyes sharpened. She had felt the hospital's obsession with bed turnover and billing codes like pressure on her neck for years. Hearing it stated like this made the pressure turn into a blade. Keene stepped closer to Voss. "The Admiral arrived today," Keene said. "So, explain how you treated him for 3 weeks." Voss's face went chalky. "Clerical error." Harper tapped the tablet. "We pulled your records on other indigent veterans. Several were admitted in the system billed to the VA, but there is no clinical documentation of care. No nursing notes, no medication administration record, no lab draws, ghost patients." The word hung in the air like smoke. Pierce's hands curled into fists. "That's fraud." Keene's gaze did not leave Voss. "It is federal fraud." Voss's voice broke. "You can't prove intent." Harper's expression did not change. "We can seize your servers." Voss backed up a step, then another. Keene's voice lowered. "You moved a dying man into a hallway for a donor. You tried to destroy a nurse for refusing. And while you were doing that, you were stealing from the same government you are now threatening to sue." Voss's knees buckled slightly. He tried to turn to move toward the door, toward escape. 2 military police stepped in front of him, blocking the exit. "We are not arresting you," Keene said. "We are detaining you." Voss's voice rose desperate. "This is kidnapping." Keene's gaze stayed steady. "Local police are on the way. Federal agents are on the way. Your phones and computers are being secured as we speak." Outside the bay, Elliot Wexler stood in the corridor, having followed the movement like a man who could not look away. His son was still in the hallway on a gurney, furious and embarrassed, yelling at a nurse who did not care. Wexler ignored him. He looked at Rachel, then at the blood on her shirt, then at the military team rolling Admiral Granger toward the roof. "Is he going to live?" Wexler asked quietly. Rachel's voice was tired now. "He has a chance." Wexler's gaze slid to Voss, who looked like a man watching his life collapse in real time. "I believed your brochure," Wexler said to Voss, voice calm. "I believed your speeches at the gala." Voss tried to speak. Nothing came. Wexler looked back at Rachel. "You made a decision in that trauma bay I did not like. Then I watched you make a decision I respect." Rachel did not respond with gratitude. She did not have room for it yet. She watched as Admiral Granger was moved into the elevator, escorted by Marines. Keene stepped beside her at the nurse's station. "Come with us," he said. Rachel blinked. "To where?" Keene's eyes stayed on the elevator doors. "With him." Rachel's throat tightened. "General, I have no uniform. I have no gear. I have a bag with scrubs and a stethoscope." Keene looked at her. "You have what we need." Pierce stepped closer, voice low. "Rachel." She looked at him. Pierce's eyes were wet, not with tears, with exhaustion and something like shame. "I'm sorry." Rachel held his gaze for a moment. "I asked you to watch him," she said quietly. Pierce's jaw trembled. "I did. I tried. I wasn't enough." Rachel's expression did not soften, but her voice did not sharpen either. "Then be enough next time." Pierce nodded, swallowing hard. A nurse approached Rachel, the same one who had brought the pulse ox earlier. She held a cup of coffee with both hands like it was fragile. "Here," she said barely above a whisper. "You're shaking." Rachel took it. The heat seeped into her palms. For the first time in hours, she realized her hands were trembling. Not from fear of blood. From the delayed impact of everything. The hallway. The scalpel. The sound of the heart beating against her fingers. Keene waited without pushing. Rachel took one sip of coffee, then set the cup down on the counter. She looked around the ER. Faces watching. Nurses, who had been silent under Voss, now staring like they were seeing the building for the first time. A place that had demanded obedience suddenly forced to witness what courage looked like. Voss's shouting echoed from the trauma bay corridor as MPS escorted him away. "You can't do this," he shouted. "I have rights. I have lawyers." Keene did not react. Rachel picked up her bag from where it had been dropped near the entrance. She followed Keene toward the roof access. The elevator ride up was silent except for the hum of machinery and the faint vibration of rotors above growing stronger with each floor. Rachel watched the numbers climb. Her reflection in the elevator doors looked like a stranger-soaked hair blood on her shirt, eyes too calm for what she had just done. The doors opened onto the roof access corridor, and the sound hit hard. Rotor wash slapped against the building. Wind roared through gaps. Rain whipped sideways, turning into needles. A Blackhawk sat on the helipad like a predatory animal engine's running blade spinning in a blur. Crew moved quickly, shouting into headsets. Admiral Granger was loaded onto the helicopter, secured to a stretcher monitors connected. The flight surgeon glanced at Rachel as she approached. "Sit tight," he said, then seemed to realize she was not the kind of person who sat tight. Rachel climbed in and took the jump seat opposite the stretcher, strapping herself in with practiced motions that did not belong to a civilian. Keene climbed in behind her, then Harper, then the rest of the medical team. The door gunner pulled the sliding door shut. The noise became contained, a constant thunder that vibrated through the metal floor. Rachel looked at Admiral Granger. His breathing was steadier now, oxygen supporting him, medication keeping him calm. The monitor showed a rhythm that still looked fragile but real. She reached out and rested 2 fingers lightly on his wrist, feeling the pulse beneath skin. Alive. Keene leaned slightly toward her, voice raised over the engine. "You did good work." Rachel did not accept praise. Not yet. She stared through the small window as the helicopter lifted the hospital, shrinking beneath them, its glass facade reflecting gray sky and flashing lights. Down below, the lobby that had smelled like citrus and money was now crawling with uniforms and investigators. Rachel watched the rooftop edge slide away. Her bag sat at her feet. Inside it, folded scrubs and a coin that felt heavier than it had any right to be. She kept her gaze on the Admiral's monitor, listening to the beeps, steadying her breathing to match the machine. The helicopter banked slightly, and rain streaked across the window in fast lines. Rachel lowered her eyes to the Admiral again, checking tubing, checking the dressing, checking the rhythm. Keene's voice came through her focus, calm-clipped. "We are diverting." Rachel looked up, meeting his gaze. "Where?" she asked. Keene did not answer with ceremony. He answered like an order. "A secure facility," he said. Rachel nodded once, then looked back to the stretcher, letting the sound of the rotors fill the space where questions tried to form. "A secure facility," Keene said, and the word sat in the cabin like an extra piece of weight. Rachel kept her eyes on Admiral Granger's monitor. The rhythm held uneven but present. Oxygen hissed. The flight surgeon adjusted a dial and leaned in close to check the dressing over the open chest packing. "He's stable enough," the surgeon shouted over the engine noise. "For now." For now was all emergency medicine ever promised. Rachel nodded once and forced herself to breathe in slow, controlled pulls. The vibration of the aircraft worked into her bones, a familiar hum that made her feel both alert and exposed. She had spent years trying to become small. Now she was strapped into a military helicopter above a city that had just watched her become visible. Her phone felt heavier than it should in her pocket. It buzzed. Rachel ignored it, eyes still on the Admiral's face. It buzzed again, longer, insistent. Keene noticed the movement of her hand near her pocket. His gaze sharpened. "Is that yours or operational?" Rachel pulled the phone out, shielding the screen from the flight crew's light. Unknown number. No caller ID. Just a text. "You made a scene today, Commander. We've been looking for you." Rachel's throat tightened. A second message arrived before she could move her thumb. The incident in Raqqa. "We know what really happened." The cabin noise seemed to dim, as if her brain had decided only those words mattered. Keene leaned in. "Rachel." She handed him the phone without a word. Keene read the messages once, then again, his expression changing in small increments. His jaw tightened. His eyes hardened. The lines around his mouth deepened like someone had twisted a key inside him. "How long have you been getting this kind of contact?" he asked. Rachel watched Admiral Granger's chest rise and fall, watched the faint flutter of eyelids under sedation. "I have not," she said. "Not like that." Keene lowered the phone. "Raqqa," he repeated, careful. That is not in your personnel file. It would not be, Rachel said. Keene studied her face, and for a moment the general in him collided with the man who had known her before she became a nurse in a hospital basement. You look like you are hearing artillery, Keene said quietly. Rachel's hand, still damp, still faintly pink from blood and scrubbing, clenched once on her thighs. I am hearing a radio that never turned off. Keene stared at her, then glanced toward Admiral Granger. His voice dropped more private, even in a loud cabin. Tell me why a retired admiral was under a bridge in Norfolk. Rachel did not answer immediately. She reached for the battered jacket that had been bagged with the admiral's belongings. A corpsman had tossed it near her boots with the rest of the personal effects, treating it like any other patient property. The jacket looked like a relic, faded fabric seams worn thin, a smell of smoke and rain in the outside world. He would not let go of this, Rachel said. Even when he was crashing. Keene's eyes narrowed. He was confused. Rachel shook her head once. He was acting. Keene's gaze stayed locked on the jacket now. Rachel. She lifted it and felt weight in the hem that did not belong. Not heavy like a weapon. Dense like something hidden where hands rarely searched. Rachel patted the inside lining, fingers quick-controlled, searching for a seam that felt wrong. Her touch found rough threadwork, crude stitching that did not match factory stitching. Keene leaned forward. What is that? Rachel pulled trauma shears from the medical kit clipped near the jump seat. She positioned the jacket on her lap, braced against the vibration. Then she cut the crude seam with 2 decisive snips. Something small fell into her palm. A micro SD card. Keene's eyes widened. The flight surgeon glanced up, saw the shape in Rachel's hand, then looked away without a question, as if he understood that some things were not meant for open discussion in a cabin. Rachel held the card between finger and thumb like it could burn her. Keene's face darkened. Evidence. Rachel nodded. He went dark because someone was watching his accounts. Watching his home. Watching his security detail. So he became invisible. He became the one thing society does not look at twice. Keene stared at the card. A homeless veteran. Rachel's voice stayed steady, but a thin edge showed through. He hid in plain sight. Keene's eyes flicked to Admiral Granger, and he got sick. Rachel looked at the sedation line, the ventilator support, the bandages, the open chest packing that would never belong on a civilian flight. Pneumonia. Sepsis. He ended up in a hospital that values donors more than people. Keene exhaled slowly. And your director billed the VA and lit him up on every system that checks those codes. Rachel lifted her phone again, showing Keene the message. Whoever sent this thinks the Admiral is with me, or thinks I have what he had. Keene stared at the texts. Raqqa. He repeated quieter, and his eyes shifted back to Rachel. Talk. Rachel's mind tried to resist. Her body resisted harder, a tightness in her chest like her ribs had turned to wire. My unit was wiped out, she said. That is what the report says. Keene did not interrupt. Rachel swallowed. The sound of rotors filled the silence for her. We found a weapons cache, she continued. American weapons in a warehouse that was supposed to be empty. The coordinates came through channels. The liaison said it was confirmed. We moved in. Keene's gaze sharpened. The liaison. Rachel's eyes did not leave the micro SD card. The one who sent my unit. Keene's voice lowered. Name. Rachel hesitated, only long enough to hate that she was hesitating. Director Nolan Graves. Keene went still. His stare snapped to her like a weapon coming on target. Rachel's throat tightened. Graves gave the coordinates. We radioed back that the weapons were real. 10 minutes later, a drone strike hit. Keene's face changed. The warehouse. Rachel shook her head once. Us. The word landed like a body. Keene's jaw clenched hard enough that muscle jumped near his temple. He looked away toward the cabin wall as if he could find a reason to reject what he had just heard. Rachel did not let him. It was a cleanup, she said. We saw something we were not supposed to see. They erased us. Keene stared back at her. And you survived. Rachel's voice tightened, barely. and I stayed quiet. I stayed small. I did not take promotions. I did not take attention. I did not give anyone a reason to look at me twice. Keene looked at her soaked shirt, the bloodstains, the rank he had spoken in the hospital lobby. That ended today. Rachel did not respond. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "General, we are on heading for Andrews." Keene lifted his wrist tablet, checking coordinates and clearance notes. "We are cleared," he said, then paused, scrolling once. Rachel's eyes narrowed. Who was on the ground? Keene's thumb stopped. His expression shifted again like a door closing. "Defense Intelligence Reception Team," he read. Rachel's blood ran cold. "Who authorized custody transfer?" Keene stared at the tablet, then read the line again. His voice flattened. "Director Graves." Rachel felt the cabin tilt slightly as the helicopter banked and adjusted. The window view shifted from ocean gray to city grid to a wide stretch of green and concrete. "General," she said, and the word came out sharper than she intended. "Do not land there." Keene looked at her eyes hard. "Explain." Rachel held up the micro SD card. "If Graves is the one who erased my unit, and he is the one who signed the transfer, then the people waiting on that tarmac do not want a debrief. They want this card. They want the Admiral. They want me." Keene stared at her for a beat that felt like a lifetime. Then his decision hit like a switch. Keene keyed his mic. "Pilot, abort Andrews' approach." The pilot's voice came back confused and tense. "General Andrews is priority clearance. Ground team is staged." Keene's voice rose no ambiguity. "Abort." The pilot hesitated. "Sir, we have civilian air traffic. We have a corridor. We have a schedule." Keene leaned forward toward the cockpit bulkhead. "I said abort. New destination, Quantico. Full perimeter lockdown. No one approaches this aircraft without my authorization." The pilot's tone changed. "Copy." The helicopter banked hard. Rachel felt the force press her into the seat. The flight surgeon braced a hand on the Admiral's stretcher to keep tubing from pulling. Outside the window, far below, she saw the runway and the waiting convoy like black teeth lined in formation. SUVs in a neat row. Men in dark suits standing too still. The helicopter veered away from them. Rachel watched a single figure near the lead vehicle lift a hand to his ear, head tilted, as if listening to a report he did not like. Keene's radio crackled with overlapping voices. Confusion. Questions. Authority battling authority. Rachel kept her eyes on the horizon and on the Admiral's monitor. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. One line. They realized. Rachel did not show it to Keene this time. He already knew. The aircraft dropped lower treetops now visible. The pilot hugged the terrain like he was trying to hide the helicopter inside the earth. Then the cabin filled with a new sound, a sharp electronic scream from the warning system. The pilot's voice cut through sudden and high. "Missile lock. Missile lock." Rachel's stomach dropped. The flight surgeon's face went tight. Inside U.S. airspace, he muttered disbelief cracking through his professionalism. Keene's hand went to the sidearm on his hip. He did not draw it. Not yet. His eyes went to Rachel. "Keep him alive." Rachel gripped the Admiral's stretcher rail with both hands. "He is alive," she said, as if saying it could anchor reality. The CO pilot shouted something to the pilot. The helicopter lurched, dropped hard, then surged. The floor tilted. Rachel's harness cut into her shoulder. Outside, bright flares erupted from the aircraft, white bursts that turned the world into brief daylight. The pilot flew low enough that Rachel could see individual trees, the blur of trunks and branches whipping past. The warning system screamed again. The Kyo pilot's voice cracked. "They are firing on us." Keene's face hardened into something Rachel had only seen in war zones. "This is an attempted execution," he said. The pilot's tone was strained. "We are taking ground-based lock. We do not have room to climb." Keene leaned forward and barked over the intercom. "Put it down." The pilot shouted back, "We are not at a landing zone." Keene's eyes flicked to the terrain through the side window. A muddy, open field near a highway, a shallow dip in the earth, a line of trees. Not safe. Just possible. There, Keene said, that clearing. The pilot committed. The helicopter dropped in a fast descent, rotors hammering the air. The ground rushed up. Rachel felt her body brace before her mind could. The landing hit like a fist. Metal shrieked. The aircraft slammed into mud, skidding sideways. The landing gear collapsed with a violent crunch. The cabin jerked, throwing people against straps and seats. Rachel's head snapped forward, then back pain flashing at the base of her skull. The door gunner yelled something. The sound cut off in a burst of static. Silence crashed in after the noise, a ringing vacuum. Then voices returned sharp and urgent. "Everyone out," Keene shouted, already unbuckling. "Move, defensive perimeter." Rachel's hands went to the Admiral's harness. The flight surgeon was already at her side, eyes wild but focused. "We have to move him," Rachel said. The surgeon nodded. On 3. They dragged the stretcher toward the jammed door. Outside, rain and mud, and the smell of fuel hit Rachel like a wave. The field was soaked, the ground sucking at boots. The helicopter's rotors were still blades twisted at a wrong angle. A broken animal leaking fluid. Keene kicked the door wider. Marines spilled out, rifles up, forming a perimeter around the wreckage with quick, practiced movement. Rachel and the flight surgeon hauled the Admiral into the tall grass away from the aircraft. His monitor beeped in frantic little alarms, complaining about motion, about interrupted readings, about the insult of being moved. Rachel ignored it and focused on his pulse, fast, present. She looked toward the highway. Sirens approached in the distance, but over the sirens came something else. Engines, many of them. Black SUVs tore across the field, bouncing hard over the rough terrain, cutting grooves in the mud. Rachel's mouth went dry. Keene saw them too. His face did not change. His voice did. "Contact," he shouted. Multiple vehicles. The Marines shifted their positions. The door gunner, blood on his forehead from the crash, took a knee behind the twisted fuselage and raised his weapon. The SUVs stopped at a distance that felt deliberate, close enough for violence, far enough for intimidation. Men poured out. Not uniformed military. Not local police. Tactical gear without insignia. Faces covered. Movement disciplined. Cleanup. Keene wiped blood from a cut near his hairline, then raised his pistol. "They do not want witnesses," he shouted to Rachel. Rachel crouched low over the Admiral body, shielding him, hands on the portable monitor and oxygen line. "We need a hospital," she yelled back. "Not this." Bullets cracked. Mud kicked up around the wreckage. Metal pinged as rounds struck armor plating. Glass shattered somewhere near the cockpit with a sound like ice breaking. The flight surgeon flinched, then forced himself, still hands on the oxygen bag, keeping rhythm. Rachel kept her head down, eyes scanning, heart hammering. A Marine near the tree line fired in controlled bursts. Another called out distances. Another shouted for ammo. Keene crawled closer to Rachel behind the wreckage, keeping low. "Give me the card," he shouted. Rachel's hand went to her pocket where the micro SD sat. She pressed it into Keene's palm. Keene looked toward Captain Harper, who was firing from behind a section of twisted metal. Harper Keene roared, "Take this. Run to the highway. Get state police. Get it to a federal chain that is not compromised." Harper's head snapped toward him. "Sir, I am not leaving you." Keene's voice turned to steel. "That is an order." Harper crawled over, took the micro SD, and for a second held Keene's gaze. Then he tucked it deep into an inner pocket and sprinted into the rain boots, tearing through mud. Shots followed him, tearing up the ground around his feet. Harper did not slow. He vanished into the tree line. Rachel exhaled a breath she did not realize she was holding. The attackers adjusted their fire, shifting toward the trees. A man shouted something she could not hear over gunfire. Keene's face tightened. "They want that card." Rachel's eyes flicked toward the cockpit where a rifle lay near the dead pilot. She had not touched a rifle in years. Her hands moved anyway, grabbing it, checking it with a motion too automatic for a civilian nurse. The weight in her hands felt like a door reopening. Keene saw the rifle in her grasp and did not comment. He only nodded once, as if he had always known this version of her was still alive. "Watch the left," he ordered. Rachel lifted the rifle and aimed low, scanning the grass and mud. A figure crawled through the tall grass toward the Admiral, moving fast and low. For a second, Rachel saw the hands. Gloved. A knife in one of them. Rachel's breath steadied. She pressed the trigger in a controlled burst. The figure dropped, face down, sliding in mud. One down, Rachel called, voice flat. Keen fired toward the SUVs, forcing heads down. Then the gunfire stopped. Abrupt, suspicious, like a hand had closed around a throat. A man stepped forward from behind the lead SUV, holding a megaphone. His coat was long, soaked with rain, but he wore it like a uniform. Director Nolan Graves. He looked exactly like the kind of man who would smile on a stage while other men died for his decisions. General Keen Graves called through the megaphone. "Surrender, Admiral Granger, and we de-escalate." Keen rose slightly behind cover pistol still up. "He is a retired admiral and a patriot. You are a traitor." Graves smiled, visible even at a distance. "You have 30 seconds before this position is reduced to ash." Rachel's eyes scanned the field. She saw no mortar team, but she saw something else. A large medical oxygen cylinder had been thrown from the wreckage. It lay on its side valve, hissing, leaking a white mist into the rain. Her mind snapped to a memory of field medicine, of improvisation, of turning what you had into what you needed. Rachel leaned toward Keen, keeping her voice low. "The oxygen tank." Keen's eyes followed her gaze. Understanding hit him like a physical thing. Rachel's voice stayed steady. "It is leaking." Keen looked toward the approaching line of attackers. He looked at the wreckage. He looked at the tank. Then he nodded once. "Roll it." 2 Marines grabbed the cylinder and shoved it, grunting as the heavy metal fought the mud. It rolled, wobbling, moving down the incline toward the attackers. Graves' head tilted slightly as he noticed it. His smile faltered. Rachel brought the rifle up, not aiming at a man. She aimed at the brass valve. Keen glanced at her. "You sure?" Rachel did not answer. She did not need to. She fired once. The bullet struck the valve. The world turned white. The oxygen erupted in a violent blast, a sudden fireball that swallowed the front line and threw mud and debris into the air. The concussion hit Rachel in the chest like a hammer. Her ears rang. She tasted metal. The attackers screamed. Men fell. Some crawled. Some did not move. Graves staggered back, coat-smoking face splattered with mud, his composed mask finally cracking. In the ringing silence after the blast, a new sound rose over the field. Heavy engines, not SUVs. Armored vehicles smashed through a fence near the highway, painted in marine woodland camo headlights cutting through rain. Marines poured out in numbers that changed the math instantly. A voice boomed over a loudspeaker. "Cease fire. Friendly forces." Captain Harper emerged from the tree line, soaked and muddy, waving an arm as he ran beside the lead vehicle. He made it. The attackers hesitated, then shifted their weapons, looking for escape routes. There were none. Marine rifles came up in perfect lines, muzzles steady, eyes cold. Graves stood frozen for half a second, as if he could not compute being outmaneuvered on American soil. Then he turned to run. A Marine tackled him in the mud. Another pinned his arms. Graves's megaphone fell into the grass and filled with rainwater like a drowning mouth. Keen stepped out from behind the wreckage, pistol still in hand boots, sinking into mud. He looked down at Graves, who was now face down in the field like any other body. "Director Graves," Keen said, voice calm. "You authorized an attack on a military aircraft." Graves lifted his head slightly, mud dripping from his hairline. "You have no proof." Harper approached, breathing hard, and pulled the micro SD card from his pocket, holding it up. Keen took it without ceremony. Graves' eyes locked on the card, and for the first time, fear showed cleanly on his face. Rachel remained crouched beside Admiral Granger, hands steady on the oxygen bag, watching the monitor. The Admiral's heart rate spiked from stress and motion, then settled. His rhythm held. The sedation kept him quiet, but his eyelids fluttered as if he sensed the world shaking around him. Rachel leaned close to him. "You are still here," she said low. Keen stepped closer to Rachel, crouched briefly to check the Admiral's condition, then looked at her. "You kept him alive," he said. Rachel did not look up. "He is not finished." Keene nodded once, then stood addressing the Marines who had secured the field. Get medical evac. Secure graves. Secure every vehicle and every body. No phones. No private comms. Harper turned to Rachel, mud streaked down his face. You okay? Rachel's hands trembled slightly now that the shooting had stopped. She forced them still against the Admiral's stretcher. I am functioning, she said. Harper exhaled a sharp laugh that held no humor. That is a hell of a way to say yes. Keene knelt again, voice lower. Rachel, I need you with us when this goes forward. Rachel finally looked at him. The rain ran down his face. His cut bled slightly thin red mixing with water. His eyes were locked on hers with a weight that felt like responsibility. Rachel's voice was quiet. If that card says what I think it says, there are more people like him. Keene's gaze flicked to Graves' now restrained face pressed into mud. There are. Rachel looked back to Admiral Granger, then to the horizon where sirens and lights approached from the highway. A second helicopter arrived, rotors beating the air lights, flashing a proper military medevac this time. Medics rushed in, taking over packaging, securing lines, preparing transfer. Rachel gave report fast, clinical, leaving nothing out. Pneumonia. Sepsis suspicion. Tamponade relieved. Ventricular laceration repaired. Open chest packed. Vitals stabilized. One of the medics, a senior petty officer with tired eyes, looked at Rachel's soaked clothes and bloodstains. You did the repair, he said. Rachel did not answer with pride. He needed it. They moved Admiral Granger onto a new stretcher designed for transport. Rachel walked beside it, hands still on the rails, refusing to let distance form between her and the patient. As they loaded him into the medevac, Granger's eyes fluttered open again. The sedation was lighter now, confusion pushing through. He looked at Rachel, eyes watery, face twisted with old fear. His lips moved. Echo, he rasped. Rachel leaned in close so he could hear her over the rotors. I am here, she said. Breathe. Granger's fingers tightened around hers for a second, then loosened as medication pulled him back down. Keene climbed into the medevac after the team, then looked back at the field. Graves was being dragged toward a separate vehicle, head down, coat-ruined face no longer composed. Marines searched the SUVs, pulling out weapons cases, radios, hard drives, sealed envelopes. Harper stood guard near the wreckage rifle held low, eyes scanning the tree line as if expecting the field itself to betray them. Rachel strapped herself into the medevac jump seat again, opposite the Admiral. Keene sat across from her, the micro SD card now sealed in a small evidence pouch held in his gloved hand. The medevac lifted, leaving the muddy field behind, leaving the broken Blackhawk and scattered debris, and the place where the country's clean stories had just gotten dirty. Rachel watched the ground shrink. Her body still carried the recoil of gunfire and the pressure of hands inside a chest cavity. Her mind carried Raqqa like a wound that had never fully closed. Keene leaned forward, voice steady. We are taking him to a military medical center under a perimeter you can trust. Rachel did not answer at first. She kept her eyes on the Admiral's monitor, watching each beat like it was a promise she did not want to break. Then she looked at Keene. Where does the card go? She asked. Keene held the evidence pouch up slightly. It goes to a chain I control. It goes to people who do not owe Graves favors. Rachel's voice stayed low. And if the chain is compromised? Keene's gaze did not blink. Then it breaks. Loudly. The medevac continued forward through rain and low cloud rotors, beating a rhythm that matched Rachel's heartbeat more than she wanted to admit. She rested 2 fingers on the Admiral's wrist again, feeling the pulse under skin. Alive. Keene watched her for a moment, then looked away toward the window, jaw set. No speeches, no comfort. Just the sound of an aircraft carrying a wounded admiral, a sealed piece of evidence, and a nurse who had stopped being invisible. The medevac lights flickered once as they cut through cloud, and Rachel closed her eyes briefly, letting the vibration fill the space where fear tried to speak. The medevac sat down on a rain-slick pad inside a perimeter of floodlights and armed security. The rotors slowed from thunder to a heavy chop, then to a final shuddering stop. Rachel unbuckled before the door was fully open, boots hitting the metal floor with the urgency of habit. A receiving team rushed in, faces hidden behind shields, hands already reaching for lines and monitors. They slid Admiral Granger's stretcher onto a rolling gurney built for speed, and the doors swallowed him into a corridor that smelled like clean antiseptic and new paint. No lobby music, no donation plaques. Just steel doors, clipped voices, and the steady beep of machines that did not care who funded the building. Rachel kept pace beside the gurney, fingers on the rail, eyes never leaving the Admiral's chest, dressing. A surgeon in scrubs walked backward, calling out vitals, scanning the packing, listening to the rhythm. "Pressure is holding," the surgeon said. "We keep him moving." They pushed through double doors into a trauma suite that looked like every trauma suite and unlike any civilian room she had worked in. Everything was sharper, more controlled. The staff moved without asking who was in charge because they already knew. General Keene stopped at the threshold holding a sealed evidence pouch like it weighed more than the room. A man in a dark suit waited near the wall with an ID badge clipped to his belt. He did not introduce himself with rank. He introduced himself with function. "Special Agent Mason," he said to Keene. His eyes flicked to Rachel, then to the evidence. "We have a secure chain." Keene did not hand it over yet. "Who has access?" Mason's voice stayed even. "Two people. Me and the duty judge advocate. It stays in a safe until a forensic team images it." Keene's gaze held for a beat, then he passed the pouch to Mason. Mason tucked it into a hard case and snapped it shut with a sound like a lock clicking. Rachel watched it go, then forced her attention back to the patient. A nurse pressed a mask to the Admiral's face as the anesthetic deepened. The surgeon leaned in gloved hands, steady. "Lieutenant Commander," he said, and Rachel looked up. "You are going to brief my team." Rachel nodded once. She stepped to the whiteboard and spoke in short, clean sentences. No story, only facts. Pneumonia. Likely sepsis. Tamponade relieved. Ventricular laceration repaired. Open chest packed. Transport complications. Crash-related stress response. Current vitals. The surgeon listened without interrupting, then looked toward the patient. "You bought him time," he said. Rachel did not answer with gratitude. She watched the monitor listen to the rhythm. She watched the anesthesiologist glance up and give a small nod. The doors closed. The room became a world she could not enter. Outside, the corridor felt too quiet. Keene stood beside her, rein still on his coat, a thin bandage now taped across the cut on his forehead. Captain Harper leaned against the wall nearby, mud stains dried dark on his sleeves, eyes hollow with the kind of fatigue that came after adrenaline stopped doing its job. Keene looked at Rachel. "You are going to debrief." Rachel's jaw tightened. "With who?" Keene's gaze did not shift. "With me. With legal. With people who need the truth on paper." Rachel stared down the corridor, trying to remember how to exist in a world where her hands were not inside a chest. Harper spoke quietly. "Graves is in custody." Rachel looked at him. Harper's voice stayed low. He screamed about immunity. He threatened everyone. Then he saw the evidence case and he went quiet. Rachel nodded once, then looked back toward the surgery doors. Keene's tone softened by a fraction. "You should eat." Rachel almost laughed, but the sound did not come. "I do not think my stomach remembers food." Keene glanced down the hall. "We will find you coffee." Rachel did not tell him she could still feel the heat of blood on her skin, even after scrubbing. She did not tell him the smell of leaking fuel still lived in her nose. She did not tell him the text message still sat in her phone like a live wire. They placed her in a small room with a table, a recorder, and a flag in the corner. A judge advocate in uniform sat across from her, pen poised. Special Agent Mason stood by the door. Keene remained close, silent eyes fixed on Rachel as if he could anchor her to the present. Rachel answered questions. Names, times, locations, orders given and refused. She described the patient move into the hallway. She described Voss's termination form and the camera threat. She described the helicopter landing and the armed entry. She described the crash and the attack, the oxygen cylinder, and the fireball. When the judge advocate asked about Raka, Rachel's hands clenched on the edge of the table. Keene's voice cut in calm but firm. "That portion is classified. It will be handled under a closed review." The judge advocate nodded and wrote something Rachel did not read. Hours later, Rachel stood in a hallway outside a recovery room, hair finally dry, wearing borrowed fatigues that did not fit her perfectly, but felt closer to truth than civilian jeans. The door opened, and the surgeon stepped out, mask lowered. "He is out of immediate danger," he said. "He will need a full repair and a long recovery. But he is alive." Rachel's breath left her in a slow exhale she did not know she had been holding since the hospital hallway in Norfolk. The surgeon studied her face. "He asked for you before he went under." Rachel stepped into the room. Admiral Granger lay pale against white sheets, tubes, and monitors surrounding him like a constellation. His eyes were open, cloudy, but focused. He looked smaller than the legend people attached to him, but his gaze was still sharp. Rachel moved to the bed and placed 2 fingers on his wrist. The pulse was steady. Granger's lips moved. His voice was rough. Echo. Rachel leaned close. "I am here." Granger's eyes held hers. "You came back." Rachel's throat tightened. "I did not leave." He stared at her for a long moment, then his gaze shifted to the bandage on her forearm, where an IV had been placed during the crash. "You are bleeding." Rachel glanced down. "It is nothing." Granger's mouth tightened as if he wanted to argue, then he let it go. "Keene." Rachel turned. Keene stood at the foot of the bed, posture rigid. Granger's voice was low but clear. "Do not let them take it." Keene nodded once. "It is secured." Granger's eyes returned to Rachel. "You were hiding." Rachel did not deny it. Granger's voice softened. "It did not keep you safe." Rachel's jaw tightened. She did not answer. She did not have an answer that fit in a room this clean. 2 days later, Rachel sat on a bench outside the military hospital cafeteria, coffee cooling between her hands. Captain Harper approached, carrying a folder. "You have visitors," he said. Rachel looked up. Harper hesitated, then added, "From Norfolk." Rachel's stomach tightened. "Voss." Harper shook his head. "Not him." Rachel followed Harper down a corridor lined with framed photos of units and missions. At the end was a small waiting area where a man in a tailored suit stood with his hands clasped behind his back. Elliot Wexler looked out of place among the uniforms, but he held his posture like he had paid for a room in every building he entered. His son, Graham, sat in a wheelchair beside him, face bruised by humiliation more than injury. Wexler's gaze fixed on Rachel. "Nurse Carter." Rachel stopped a few feet away. "Mr. Wexler." Graham opened his mouth. "Dad, this is the woman who had Marines carry me out like a bag of laundry." Wexler turned his head slightly. Graham closed his mouth. Wexler looked back at Rachel. "I saw the footage," he said. "Not the curated version. The real one." Rachel's eyes narrowed. "How?" Wexler's expression did not soften. "Malcolm Voss tried to sell me a story. I bought a different story. People talk. Files move." Rachel did not respond. Wexler stepped closer and lowered his voice. "You were fired for doing the right thing in a place that rewards the wrong thing." Rachel's grip tightened around her coffee cup. "I do not need sympathy." Wexler nodded once, accepting the line like a man used to being refused. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a card. "I run a rehab and prosthetics institute in Virginia Beach," he said. "Veteran trauma, advanced mobility, recovery programs that do not get cut when a quarterly report looks ugly." Rachel stared at the card without taking it. Wexler continued calm. "I need a chief medical officer who will tell donors to sit down when they are wrong. Someone who can run a room under pressure and still remember the patient in the hallway." Rachel's eyes lifted. "You are offering me a job." Wexler held the card out again. "I'm offering you a place where your spine is not a liability." Rachel took the card, slowly feeling the weight of it in her fingers. Wexler looked toward the window, then back. "Voss is done. Federal fraud, VA billing, ghost charts. The board is tearing the building apart from the inside." Rachel's face did not change. People like him find new buildings. Wexler's mouth tightened, not this time. Weeks passed in a blur of briefing sealed rooms and quiet phone calls. The micro SD card became a case file with numbers instead of names. Graves disappeared behind a wall of legal process. Voss disappeared behind a wall of handcuffs and cameras. Rachel stayed near Admiral Granger until he was stable enough to move without machines screaming. She watched him rebuild breath by breath, stubborn as stone. Then the invitation came. A formal envelope, heavy paper, a date, a place. The White House lawn looked too bright under the sun, the kind of brightness that made shadows sharper. Rachel stood in dress whites that felt unfamiliar on her shoulders, rank on her sleeve, catching light. She could feel eyes on her from rows of chairs, cameras, uniforms, and suits. Admiral Granger sat nearby, thinner but present gaze fixed forward. General Keene stood behind him, hands clasped, expression unreadable. When Rachel's name was called, she rose and walked to the podium. The president placed the medal around her neck. The medal settled cold against her skin, heavier than she expected. Applause rose polite at first. Admiral Granger pushed himself to his feet, slow and stubborn. He faced Rachel and lifted a trembling hand in a clean salute. The sound changed. It grew. People stood. Rachel held still, chin-level eyes forward, breathing steady. Later, under a tent with white cloth and soft lighting, Wexler found her again. He held 2 glasses. He offered one. Rachel took it and did not drink. Wexler glanced at the medal. Commander Carter. Rachel's voice was quiet, just Rachel. Wexler nodded once. About the Institute. Rachel looked past him at the crowd. She saw Captain Harper across the lawn talking with a Marine. She saw Dr. Pierce at the edge of the gathering, suit slightly rumpled, looking like a man who had finally chosen a side and was still learning how to stand on it. Rachel turned back to Wexler. "I will take the role," she said. Wexler's eyes sharpened. On what terms? Rachel's grip tightened on the glass. "We build a program for the ones nobody sees. The veterans who sleep behind bus stations. The ones who do not have families who call senators. The ones who end up in hallways." Wexler held her gaze for a beat, then nodded. "Done." Rachel looked down at the medal, then at her hands. They were steady. When her phone buzzed, she checked it without flinching. A caseworker message. A location, a name with no next of kin listed. A man sleeping under an overpass. Rachel slipped the phone into her pocket and stepped out of the tent, away from cameras, away from speeches. The air outside smelled like cut grass and distant traffic. Keene appeared beside her, quiet as a shadow. "You leaving early?" Rachel looked toward the road. "I have work." Keene nodded once, as if that was the only answer that ever mattered.